everybody. It is Commander Marvel, Greg, and Knightshade, Matt. And this is our fourth episode of The Escapist. And we are, it's nice to be able to have our first guest. Our first guest is joining us this evening here in Japan. A good friend of mine, Lieutenant Commander Justin Ferris of the United States Navy, who I met. Dude, it's been 10 years ago since I met you when you were just a lowly ensign and I was the new training officer at the strategic command unit we were in out in Arizona. So it is good to see you. You are in Tokyo here for about a month doing some Navy duty. So welcome to the show, my friend.
Good to be here.
Yeah, welcome.
And I was just gonna say, Justin, you and I have, we've known each other for 10 years, and I knew, the other night, it's like, wait a minute, our first guest, perfect. I got Justin in town. He's like my Aquaman expert. So what better way to tie in? Because we are part of Navy, we're at NavyComics.com, and what better to start us off with our, get the show fourth episode. But our first guest being an actual Navy officer who's not retired like myself, and also an Aquaman expert. It's all it kind of ties in, It does. So thanks a lot for joining us. And Matt, I'm gonna let you lead in with the first question for Justin, and we're just gonna kind of go from there for about an hour here.
So everybody grows up watching, getting hooked on some kind of superhero or something. Like for me growing up, my guy was Captain America. And I recall watching the cartoons whenever it said, "When Captain America throws his mighty shield." And those cheesy, corny cartoons. And that was the coolest thing in the world to me. What is it about Aquaman that draws you to him?
That's a good question. Aquaman is not, although I hope to establish that Aquaman is actually one of the gold tier DC characters and has enjoyed more success in the modern era, surprisingly, than a lot of DC characters that you would have figured would have been first to go. But for me, Aquaman, it's just, I was a big comic nerd as a kid, grew up kind of like we were talking about a little earlier, going to the spinner rack, getting books from the 7-Eleven. My parents got me a subscription to Amazing Spider-Man. They used to come in the brown envelope in your mailbox, and just loved comics. And I was drawn to Aquaman, I think, just because, in high school, I was a swimmer. I had a lot of interest in both the Navy and oceanography. I grew up watching Jacques Cousteau, which a lot of kids wouldn't recognize that name, but I'd catch the reruns of his show. And so Aquaman as a character appealed to me, the whole under the sea thing. And as I came to read more about the character and as I hope to talk about tonight, some of the iterations that were done, particularly seminal runs on the character by Peter David, I realized that this is one of the most fully fleshed, complex characters in the DC universe, and it just stuck with me. And I've loved him my whole life. I just think Arthur Curry is one of the best characters in the undersold, underappreciated characters in the DC universe.
Well, that's what I was going to. Oh, go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say I definitely agree with you. That's why I read one of the most recent runs of Aquaman. I think we discussed it prior to the podcast. That read one of his most recent runs. I think it was a short 12-issue run. I could be wrong. So anybody in the comments or anything like that, correct me. That came out around the beginning of the pandemic, and because I've always liked Aquaman. I thought, let me give this a read because I don't know much about him. And you're right, he really is, as you said, a gold tier character. Yeah, you were going to say, Greg?
Oh, yeah, no, just in terms of the Navy aspect of him, because I mean, in comics there are no really Navy superheroes, so Aquaman is as close to a Navy superhero, but even though he was never in the Navy, that we really have, if you think about it.
He really is, and you know, in his original inception, Aquaman is an old character. He was invented in, I believe, 1941, and I want to say, gosh, was it? Yeah, More Fun Comics. More Fun Comics. It would be bought out by DC. Was the ones that put out this Aquaman, but it wasn't an Aquaman you'd recognize today. I call it the Yellow Glove Aquaman because all the costume was reminiscent. The colorist used to get it wrong all the time. So instead of a green glove, it would be a yellow glove. But in 1941, he was very, very different. He was imagined as the son. Again, his father plays a role, but this time his father was an explorer of Atlantis, an incredible diver, kind of a Jacques Cousteau character, who made it to the bottom of Atlantis and there made himself a bubble to live in, and kept his son with him, and trained his son to swim in the ocean, and he wasn't really a metahuman. He was just a guy who was hanging out in Atlantis, spending all his time in his water. So he's a slightly better swimmer than most. They have the whole communicating with animals thing, but it's not telepathy. It's just, you know, he's been in the sea so long, the fish get his cues. All the elements of the character there, but we're a little weird. And that's probably the most Navy version, because he was a normal dude and he liked to mess with U-boats, and it was 1941. So I'm going to chalk that up. But very different than the Aquaman we know today.
See, I didn't know that. Being a huge DC fan, my introduction to Aquaman, and I'm the oldest of the three here. You got it, man. Yeah, I mean, that's where I first met Aquaman. Yeah. And back then, up until really recently, Aquaman was always kind of, at least in animated form on TV, he was always kind of seen as, Aquaman was always kind of a running joke. I mean, if you look at...
Why makes the fact that in the year of our Lord 2025, he's had 2 motion pictures that did well, crazy.
Right, but before then, before the movies came out, before we identified Aquaman as Jason Momoa, in animated form. I mean, you look back at the Big Bang Theory; they had no problems taking pot shots at Aquaman and kind of making him the butt of the joke. But to me, he was always the Superman of the ocean.
I agree with
and he was a real, I don't know what language we can use on the podcast, but he was a real bad A. In the cartoon, whenever he was chained to the rocks, I don't know who it was by, but his son was about to die, and he just has to get rid of his own arm. Just made that sacrifice without question to save his son. And they at least did him justice, no pun intended. They did him justice in the cartoon series, in the Justice League cartoon series from like the early 2000s.
And that was hearkening to Peter David's run. I would argue further that Aquaman is not only Superman of the ocean, he's a Superman level threat. Yeah. And that's something I hope to work through in our discussion tonight, talking about kind of the evolution of Aquaman, because he's had a roller coaster more so than any other hero, from the butt of jokes to someone who's a major powerhouse in the DC universe. Finally.
Yeah. And when was what was your first introduction to Aquaman
Same
as
as
a
you.
kid? Was
Super
it
Friends.
Super Friends?
Yeah.
And so how did that evolve? I mean, I'm just curious. I mean, like, I'm a huge, DC Captain Marvel fan. So, I mean, that came out of, early 70s Saturday morning live action to where it is today. And I always wanted to be Billy Batson and, all of us wanted to be able to say a magic word. And, but how did it happen with you with Aquaman? So it's just, you saw him on Super Friends and they're like, okay, I got to learn more about this.
Yeah, he didn't strike a chord then. He didn't.
Okay.
It wasn't until the mid 80s that I came across Peter David's Time and Tide.
Okay.
And it was such a re-envisioning it wasn't a re-envisioning of the character per se, but just kind of coalesced. Because remember, DC had gone through Crisis. They'd gone through a lot of things kind of trying to retcon their long history to make one consistent lore. And Time and Tide was an attempt to do that with Aquaman. What I liked was his blue costume. Very different.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, was this the blue when they ditched the green and orange and went with basically, for lack of a better term, if I remember correctly, it was kind of like, back when we had blue camouflage in the Navy. Was it kind of like that?
It was. It's the best costume he's ever wore. I don't know why it's used. Light blue, dark blue, white, and black, all in various wave patterns.
I've never seen this version.
Time and Tide. Go look up the book. He's in the costume's great. Aquaman's on there with long blonde hair, which again was not part of his normal clean cut look. And it grabbed my attention. And I read the book. And again, it kind of resets all his lore, his backstory, bringing it up to date. It was great. 4-issue miniseries. And then from there, it was really beginning Peter David's run on the book.
Okay.
And that's kind of, as we talked earlier, there's a Hulk connection. The Aquaman and the Incredible Hulk are actually linked characters from a perspective of the incredible work by Peter David.
Okay. That's where, when you mentioned this, I'm like, okay, well, Marvel and DC, this ought to be interesting. So, yeah. Commander, explain it away here. So,
and that's the segue, because again, this is kind of what led me into reading Peter David's work on Aquaman. Is his work on the Hulk was again, Peter David as a writer, I feel, is underappreciated. I'm just saying a lot of people don't acknowledge him for being great, but in my mind, he was one of the greatest. His work on the Hulk and Aquaman have set those characters up for their modern interpretations. In fact, what people greatly love about those modern interpretations came from this one writer, not solely, but significantly. And David caught my attention on the Hulk. Again, like I've told you before, I was mostly a Marvel guy growing up. Spider-Man, X-Men, Liefeld, the whole 90s X-Universe explosion. That was my jam.
Okay.
And but I liked the Hulk. And Peter David came around and he took the book. And what he did, and I thought this was so genius, is he brought back the Gray Hulk.
Okay.
Yeah.
When Stanley invented the Hulk, the first, I can't remember off the top of my head, but dozen so issues, he was gray. He was gray, and he talked a lot. He was much more vocal than the Savage Hulk were more or less used to. I mean, the Hulk's gone all over the place over the years, but
right.
The Savage Hulk we grew up with. And David, in his genius, looked at all the lore, as all good comic writers should. And he said, you know what? The reason Stan did it was, I think it was printing costs. It was printing costs. It was easier to make him gray at the time.
Yes, it was. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that was that's how he evolved. It started with gray because, again, it was cheap.
And then he switched to green because it popped with those purple pants, and Stan went with that. But Peter looked at it and he said, no. Now this guy was great. He talked a lot more. This was a different Hulk. This was something else. We've had Bruce Banner. We've had the Savage Hulk. This was something else. Okay. And he brought it back. And just like the early Stan Lee books, this time the Hulk oscillated with the moon. At night, the Gray Hulk came out. At day, he was Banner. But this Gray Hulk was smart. Not only smart, morally ambiguous. Adopted the name Mr. Fix-It, Joe Fix-It. Ran a Vegas casino scheme and kept Banner locked up in the penthouse during the day so he could continue his activities at night. It was brilliant. It was like anything else we'd seen in the Hulk. And I loved the Green Hulk. But this was really interesting and really kind of exploring something very different. And that alone would have made it a great run. That alone would have made it a great run. But then he throws us a curveball and he brings back the Green Hulk, who apparently had been in there the whole time. So there's now 3 personas to Banner. Banner, Savage Hulk, Mr. Fix-It. All living in his head. Ultimately, the resolution is Doc Samson, who comes along and performs some sort of psychological intervention to merge all 3 personas, Banner, Savage Hulk, Mr. Fix-It, into one Hulk. And that was so awesome. And the Hulk that emerged was green, highly intelligent, incredibly powerful. And that had such a just absolutely stamp on the franchise that you see it even today. You see it in the Marvel movies. It seeped through the MCU. We haven't seen the Gray Hulk yet, unfortunately. But nonetheless, MCU. We have Banner, we have the Green Hulk, and then after the snap, suddenly they don't get into depth about it. They just said they came to some arrangement. But what exists is very much like the Professor Hulk, a fusion of Banner and the Hulk. David laid all that work down. And you know, I haven't been a huge fan of comics in the last 5 to 10 years. There's been very few runs, but one of the greatest runs we've had in the last 10 years has to absolutely be The Immortal Hulk by Al Ewing, who kind of tapped into more of a horror aspect. But he also totally grabbed David's multiple personality idea in not only green, gray, and of course the resolution, the Professor Hulk, ended up being that he wasn't a true fusion, but just another persona. So now Banner has this giant cacophony of different personas in his head that manifest differently. But Ewing's work definitely built on David's and you know, again, shaped the entire character.
Okay. Yeah, it really to speak to that. There's one version that I like of the Hulk that I learned about a couple years ago. He's actually called Cluh. That's Hulk backwards. And really? It's what happens to the Hulk whenever he gets as sad as he does angry. And then he transforms into that. And it's really, really interesting. I would encourage you to look into it. I can't say I know much about I can't say I know much about it other than the cursory introduction to it and the video that I saw about it. But it's worth reading. It was pretty captivating.
It's the whole multiple personality thing for Banner has spewed a litany of possible stories. But again, that was all done from Peter David's work. He's the one to really kind of say, instead of just normal guy and savage beast, what's in between?
Yeah, I never knew that. I mean, I knew that the Hulk, had morphed into different things, but I didn't know how it began. I guess, with you explaining it, I go, okay, now it makes sense. I did not realize that that's where that all stemmed from.
So ultimately, Peter David would leave that run of the Hulk due to creative differences. And to me, the book just didn't hit the same. But where he went after that was to Aquaman. And now he'd already been in, again, Time and Tide was mid 80s. So he'd taken a swipe at the fruit, but they gave him his own run on Aquaman. And this got my attention. And this is when I truly started to love the character. Because here was this talented writer who'd done so much on the Hulk that, again, the work he'd done on the Hulk persists to this very day. It's in our movies. It's shaped the character. And now he takes the reign of Aquaman. And right off the bat, you can tell something's different. First book is kind of bringing us to where the character's at the moment. But one of the first things I recall happening in the book is Aquaman throws down with Superboy. Now, granted, this was Kal-El, the clone, after the death of Superman, and of course, the reign of the Supermans.
This was Connor, right?
Right. Eventually, he became Connor Kent. By the time he was Kal-El, the clone, the imperfect clone, half Kryptonian DNA, half human DNA that would eventually be revealed to be Lex Luthor's DNA, so unless he has to worry about his hairline. But more or less powers like Superman. His strength wasn't necessarily attributed to strength, but something they called tactile telekinesis, which is basically if he touches it, he can move it with his mind. Subtle difference, but still a heavyweight. Again, during the reign of the Superman, he was up for the there's not a chump in DC's continuity. And Aquaman goes toe-to-toe with him. And that's something that kind of set a different mark from this book. Because again, like we discussed earlier, now Aquaman's in the Super Friends. And I don't think it was an intention of the writers of that cartoon, but he kind of came off as a joke.
Yeah.
And he remained a joke for a long, long time. But what Peter David did with the Hulk, he did with Aquaman, which is he took a long look at the character and realized that there's some things wrong here. You don't have to be a physicist to know that if you can hang out at the bottom of the sea, in the deepest part of the trenches, and move around like a normal person, you're super strong. Right. You're not just slightly super strong. You're insanely super strong. Furthermore, if you can even withstand that pressure, you're not just invulnerable. You're insanely invulnerable. And David started to realize these aspects of the character that had been kind of overlooked.
Yeah.
Mostly because the golden age really didn't get into that. But the 80s, it started to matter.
Science started to matter.
Yep.
You know, the closer we got to the 21st century, you know, you started seeing more science in a lot of comics. It's like, you know, we still have comic book science, but they at least tried to address some of the real science.
And I'm not to say other writers didn't allude to this, but David leaned into it. And he said, my Aquaman's a hitter. And he did. He gave Superboy a run for his money. But then the next issue, or it may have been the second issue, who was it? Black Manta? I forget. Someone pins him down, sticks his hand in a river full of piranhas, and the piranhas eat the hand off. So Aquaman shoves a harpoon in there. Not sure if that's, you know, Bureau of Medicine's choice, but that was his choice. And so we were building a different character here. This Aquaman has long hair. He has a beard. Very 90s. He has a harpoon for a hand. The orange and green are gone. The pants are kind of black. There's green stripes down the side with scales, which kind of allude to the old costume. But the top is basically shirtless. There's some sort of steel mechanism that kind of runs up to his harpoon hand. It's a gritty Aquaman.
Right.
It's a different Aquaman. A radically different Aquaman. And maybe he had to be there for the 90s, but it was good. It was good. It worked, and he was a hitter. And from there, I won't get into it, but David starts pulling out all the lore. He's bringing Aqualad back. But now he's calling himself Tempest, and he's coming into his own powers. He's bringing Aquaman's unknown child from an Eskimo. What was his name? Cool character. He's bringing Dolphin back. He's bringing all these characters for a modern interpretation, not abandoning the lore, as I hate it when they do that, but modernizing it.
Yeah, bringing them up to speed, and much like the other DC characters, bringing more into it. Yeah, I mean, much like Superman and Batman and all the others, giving them some meat, giving readers a reason to go read the comic books. Because I think most of us, especially the ones that grew up on Super Friends, all we knew was Black Manta.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
And even then, I mean, it wasn't until the movie came out, the first Aquaman movie, that we got to know a little bit more about kind of how much of a badass Black Manta was.
Yeah. Great villain. Yeah, it's nice to see the character. And again, I encourage everyone to go get David's run on Aquaman in trade, because it's just so good. It's so good. But by the time he was done, and again, another departure due to creative differences, but by the time he was done, he'd fully fleshed out the modern character we know today.
Okay.
And since that time, the books failed. Aquaman's one of those titles that it comes to an end eventually. Years, they'll start it up. Some runs go 12 issues. Some runs go longer. Mostly based on the quality of the writer, in my opinion. Because I think Aquaman's a character that if you're a good writer, you can carry it far. But we see the echoes of what David did through everything. I picked up New 52's Aquaman. And what I loved about that was, again, what he did establish the character in the modern era. That issue started with Aquaman semi running up to him, and he just punches the semi straight through the engine, knocks the engine out, stops the semi dead in its tracks, because of course he can. Someone who exists at the bottom of the ocean is going to have comparable to Superman level strength. You just can't avoid it. Also shows him leaping over a building. Very Supermanish.
Yeah.
In a single bound. But because of course he can.
Right.
If you can withstand those pressures, then being up in the air, he can't fly, but it's damn well close given how far you can leap.
Well, that's why
speaking of the tie-in to the Hulk can't fly, but that's never stopped him from being one of the most feared entities that exists.
And I love the jumping too, because again, I thought it might have been a nod to the Peter David's full effect on both DC and Marvel. But and then there's another scene where Aquaman's having bullets bounce off him, because of course he would.
Right.
If the ocean pressures aren't going to crush him, small caliber is going to do nothing.
Yeah.
And so we see a character that's gone from being a joke to what he is now. And what I like about it is none of it was forced. We all roll our eyes at overpowered characters, or people that just kind of try to juice the character, figuring they'll be more powerful, more important, maybe more readers. I never liked that. But Aquaman wasn't juiced. It was entirely organic. It was entirely writers looking at this character, really thinking about it, and then saying, you know what, he should do more than just talk to fish. There's some implications of living at the bottom of the ocean that we've never taken into account. And again, going back to Peter David's genius, we see all this wrapped up in the movie. Again, just like his influence on the MCU and the Hulk, we're here looking at the DCU and the Aquaman movie, and they cast Jason Momoa, who I knew from Stargate. Really enjoyed him there. Stargate Atlantis. He would go on to be the King of Atlantis. But he was the perfect Peter David Aquaman. The long hair, the beard. He didn't have the harpoon, but kind of the savage, kind of muscular, kind of, I don't know what I can say on a podcast, but I'll F you up. Attitude was there, and that was
Justin. I've known you for 10 years. I've never heard you swear. So
it was all there from David's run. The character was really informed by that, and it was a hit. I mean, my God, an Aquaman movie was a hit. When DC and Marvel are trying to roll out much higher tier characters that have had limited success, Aquaman was a hit, and even had a sequel that did really well. As
it wasn't a bad movie.
I would have never imagined.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad movie. I mean, people rip on those DC movies, and I'm like, they were comic book movies. Yeah. I mean, we weren't expecting.
What do people expect? That's the one thing that I like about DC is that, thanks in part to Jim Lee's guidance, because Jim Lee just has done a great job at making sure the movies have a backbone in comics instead of just a full departure from the comics.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you in terms of just Aquaman, the influence of Namor in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
What can you tell me? What can you tell people about that? Because I really don't know. I know I can't even tell you. I think Namor came first.
As far as I can ascertain, and it's a long history. It's 80 years. But I don't see much feedback between the two. You're right. Namor came around with the Invaders,
right?
Cap's World War II team. Marvel has used him intermittently over the decades. He kind of had a bit of a resurgence in the early aughts, where Namor was decided to be a mutant, which was kind of always indeterminate or not clearly stated. But now he's a mutant of his own race, the Atlanteans, but still falling under that kind of X umbrella.
Right.
So he started to have a fair amount of interactions with the X-Men, associated books, the Illuminati. And to that end, I like the character. He stands on his own. You would think there's so much similar between him and Atlantis, Under the Water.
Right.
Yeah. But really, I just don't see it. I don't think one fed into the other. I don't think one stole from the other. It's a real weird coincidence in an atmosphere where there's constant stealing and cross-pollination between DC and Marvel. That honestly, someone may in the comments point me out wrong, but I don't think there's really been a lot of cross-pollination with those two characters.
Yeah, as far as I can see, I think you're right. That there really isn't a lot of cross-pollination, like you said. They seem to be pretty distinct. Yeah.
But again, going back to the modern movie interpretation, I would have never imagined if you told me 20 years ago that Aquaman could have a hit movie on his own, or a sequel, or let's not forget how prominently he was featured in the Justice League films.
Yeah, I mean, he was in what, three movies, right?
And even the Flash's movie at the end.
Oh yeah, that's right.
It's Aquaman that rolls in. I mean, he's become cool. He's a cool guy.
Well, once Jason Momoa got cast as Aquaman, everything changed. Everything that the public image of Aquaman changed overnight.
Right. But I'm saying in the comic it had already changed.
Yeah.
And the casting was genius because it pulled back to, again, what I feel is the best run of Aquaman.
Okay.
Brought it to the film, made it feel like that Aquaman from the Peter David run. And I think that's where a lot of the success came from. And it blows my mind that we have this one writer that has informed both Aquaman in the movies and the Hulk in the movies. Again, that whole merged Banner, Hulk, Professor character was David. And I just don't think the guy gets enough props. He is one of the heavyweights of comic writing. And we still feel the impacts of his work today. Al Ewing's Hulk run, all modern runs of Aquaman, they all harken back to the work he did.
Wow. And with Aquaman, since so you said you haven't. When was the last run of Aquaman that you read?
New 52.
New 52. So it's been. I know life has taken a hold of you. So I know you haven't had much time to. You're occupied with your own little baseball team right now at home. So
that's right. But at the same time, other runs, I peek my head in every now and then. Yeah. But they just haven't grabbed me. I really like the New 52. Their take on the character. I actually did do a run after that.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just can't remember the writer. It's probably around 2016, 2017. But I haven't seen a book come out lately that really just,
okay,
pop in for an issue. But
and that kind of gets me, and Matt and I have talked about it offline. When I first started this little podcast venture, I came up with the name Navy Comics because you and I both being in the Navy, we know the Army's got Captain America, Air Force has Falcon. I mean, we could go down the list. But then when it comes to name a superhero who's been in the Navy, it's crickets. So that's kind of why we named, I came up with the name Navy Comics, and that's kind of how we're here with the podcast and everything. But what is it, for anybody who's watching or thinking about making a comic book character, I think the Navy's got a lot to draw from, not only with, start using Aquaman, but like I said, there's 7 seas, man. I mean, the water covers about 3/4 of the world. Yeah. There's a lot of ground that is yet to be covered.
I mean, it's just like we've seen Superman in different ethnicities, and we've seen, I think there's a lot of potential for different flavors of Aquaman, like an Aquaman of this sea or something like that, or at least some of Aquaman's kin to like bubble up to the surface and tie in and do something with the other parts of the water.
And they've teased at that. I mean, we have Aquaman. The old Aqualad is now Tempest, kind of a magical-based version of Aquaman. There's a new Aqualad, Jackson, forget his name. He's related to Black Manta.
Okay.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Hydrokinesis powers, which are pretty cool. But you're right. I mean, look at the Golden Age Captain Marvel family. Look at all the variants of Superman and the Super family.
Right.
I think it is particularly now with the interest in the character, it's ripe for something like that. But I think you need the right writer. Again, Aquaman's a character with a lot of lore. Actually, a huge extended family. I mean, we haven't even touched in the whole King of a Kingdom thing going on, which again kind of differentiates him from most of Justice League monarchs. And there's a lot to work with. And I think some writers find that overwhelming and they narrowly focus. And some writers embrace it all, as Peter David did. And I think that's the way to go with an Aquaman book. And in my opinion, the runs of the book that have lasted the longest do exactly that. Leave room for novelty, leave room for new stories and new characters, but embrace the lore. Embrace the rich history of an 80-year-old character.
And with the Justice League, talking about the Justice League, Aquaman in the Justice League, in the comic books, how much of a role does he really play? Because when I read
Founding member.
Well, I mean, but aside from that, because anytime I picked up a Justice League book, the only person in the satellite monitoring what's going on below has always been the Martian Manhunter. You never see Aquaman like doing, being, doing fire duty, for lack of a better term. But he was a founding member. But in terms of him playing when we think Justice League, we think of, at least I do, at least right now, I think of Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman,
right,
Green Lantern, but it just always feels like Aquaman. And I know in the comics he plays a huge role, but I think in the mindset of a lot of people, and I think part of that goes back to the Super Friends. I think
you're
our age, it goes back to that. Well, he didn't do much then. Again, this is, I'm an old guy, so that's just an old guy talking. What do you think in terms of?
He's tainted from the Super Friends. No, I agree. I agree. I like Aquaman in the League. Again, my authoritative reading on the Justice League was the JLA run.
Right.
Bringing back, I know the league's had multiple iterations over the years, but bringing back the big hitters, just a team of DC's best, which included Aquaman. And I think the JLA used him well, and again, used him in a way that was informed by Peter David's writing. An Aquaman that could hit, an Aquaman that knocked down steel doors, Aquaman that was not waiting around to talk to fish in a nearby room. He's getting out there and getting at it, and that's what I like about the character. Again, these thoughtful interpretations. And much like, again, you come with a power set like that, it's like, well, what are his weaknesses? One of them has always been water, which makes sense. You keep him more than 24 hours out of water. I'm not sure what the modern, they might have dialed that down or up, but he starts to lose his abilities because he lives in the water.
Yeah.
But others have gotten thoughtful about the fact that, and this was in the more recent run, that Aquaman really has trouble hearing people.
Really?
He used to live in the ocean. Sound transmits so much better in the water. So when he gets up here, we all appear to be speaking softly to him.
Really? Huh.
And kind of explored that idea to the fact that he's probably vulnerable to certain type of sonic weapons.
Okay.
Again, and it's that kind of world building and just thoughtful interpretation.
Well, and then also too, the use of science in there too.
Yeah.
Naval science plays, what you're talking about. I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. You and I have both had Navy training. That's right. Sound, that does make sense.
Yep. And that's why I think Aquaman's as close as we'll get to a Navy character.
Okay.
Might not be in the uniform, but I will say again, and we saw this in the movies, where Aquaman's investigated by and working with the U.S. Navy.
Right.
That happens in the book quite a bit.
Okay.
So I don't know how long till maybe we could get him in the reserves. He seems to have qualifications. He could probably
maybe get a direct commission. I used to sit on those boards. That'd be a great interview. But before we wrap things up,
I can just see you like a little schoolboy, like shaking with your clipboard, getting ready to interview Aquaman, and just trying your darndest to be a professional.
Officer interview boards are interesting because is somebody, and Justin, have you sat on those boards now? Are you sitting on those direct commission boards? So now we're on the flip side of the board, and you're looking at these kids. I'm kind of segueing off here for a second, but people want to come into the Navy, want to become officers. The guys that are coming in now, I've many times, after we've interviewed somebody, we're sitting with the three interviewers. We're all going, this guy's way smarter than us. He should be here. Why am I interviewing him? He should be interviewing me.
I'll agree. The future looks bright.
Yeah. But before we wrap up, just a quick question about Aquaman villains, because we touched on Black Manta. Who are some of the other major villains that, guy like me, I mean, somebody who grew up in a DC look, but there's so much out there. Who do I watch out for, say tomorrow when I crack open an Aquaman comic book for the first time?
That's an interesting question, because you have your big, Black Manta.
Yeah.
You have Orm, Ocean Master, Aquaman's half brother.
Right.
But he doesn't really have a rogues gallery like the Flash.
Right.
Flash has a rogues gallery.
Yeah.
But Superman and Batman have a list of villains. Superman, Lex Luthor, Parasite. You can kind of easily run down a few. Aquaman, he doesn't have that is something that's kind of under fleshed out with the character.
Okay.
But to tell you the truth, that's something I liked about the book, about David's run, about subsequent runs. Black Manta always shows up. That's almost a guarantee.
Yeah. And Black Manta has deep Navy ties too. I mean, at least from what I remember in researching everything, going, okay, there's a bit of Navy here, but
he's a very cool character.
Yeah.
But again, as far as like arch villain, I don't think anyone else really rises to. Even Orm is a sometimes alley nowadays. But I like that. I like that. I like the fact that you never know what you're going to get with an Aquaman book.
Okay.
Whereas you can find a predictable cast of villains in other comics. It was a little different that way.
Okay.
I think it forces the writing in a more creative direction, because Batman will always go back to the Joker. The Joker is never going away. But with Aquaman, he doesn't have, like you said, the rogues gallery that is so prominent for other superheroes. So it forces you to be creative in a different way of how to handle the action, how to handle the intrigue that is Aquaman.
No, I agree. And it's getting late, and I'm probably blanking on someone, but I'm trying to think of the major villains from David's run, and it's just not coming to me.
Yeah.
But yeah,
that's okay. We're planning on having you on again before you go back to the other side of the world. We come up with, we'll figure out what we missed in this episode and pick up on it with next episode. So, hey, Matt, before we wrap things up, any last questions to the commander here?
No, not off the top of my head. I was trying to think about more and more so we can make good use of his time, but I think just in his narrative, he answered questions I didn't even know I had.
Okay. Yeah. And well, guys, we will pick up this conversation on the other side of this podcast. But Justin, like I said, are you gonna have time from your busy working schedule up there in Tokyo to join us on the next podcast? I'm putting you on the spot.
I think I will. I always have time to talk comics.
That's great.
Okay. Well, listen, hey, everybody who's tuning in, it is evening here in Japan. So when most people see this, it is going to be morning in America. We do have some viewers watching right now, but for the vast majority of people that are going to watch us, everybody's back over in the States and over in North America and Europe somewhere, or maybe even Australia. I don't know. But bottom line is, hey, like and subscribe. We are on YouTube, and if you're looking for Navy Comics, if you're looking for this podcast and this video show, I don't know, what do we call it now? We call it video cast. I don't know what. Justin, you got kids. What are the young people calling stuff that we're doing now? I mean, we got podcasts, but what's the video? Is it video cast? I don't know.
I'll check.
I think it's still podcast.
Is it still pod? Okay. So, but anyway,
the boys.
Yeah. But yeah. If you're looking for us, you can find all of our social media at NavyComics.com. On YouTube, we're at Navy Comics. We're on Twitch at Navy Comics TV, though that might change here in the next couple of weeks as I kind of try to figure out what a good handle, because they took somebody had Navy Comics on Twitch and long since disappeared. So that's the one place we don't have our handle. But everywhere else we are at Navy Comics, and like I said, at Navy Comics, we're NavyComics.com, and from there you can link it. You can find us right now pretty much on all the major socials. So, Justin, before we wrap up, any last words? Any food for thought?
I don't think so, gentlemen. I really enjoyed talking comics, so I don't get to do this enough.
Yeah.
I've enjoyed this. It's
we don't get to do it enough either, and we started the podcast.
And unfortunately, it's a Monday night. Normally we do this on Sunday night, but because of your jet lag, we kicked it over a day. So, and fortunately, Matt is off tomorrow, so he doesn't have to worry about getting up and chase. And
nice.
And Justin, have you dealt with getting on a train in Japan at rush hour?
Not yet.
Dude. So, Matt can probably tell you some horror stories.
Oh yeah, I can tell you plenty after we get off the air. I want to save my best language for after the podcast is over.
All right, guys. Well, listen. Hey, on that note, thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in, and we will see you in about 2 weeks. It'll be Matt and Commander Ferris and myself, Commander Marvel, or as my friends usually call me, just Smitty. Lieutenant Commander Smith. I also answer to that. So, hey, again, Justin, fellow member of the 04 Mafia, thanks again for joining us. And Matt, Justin, on behalf of Matt, Justin, and myself, thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you very, very soon. Bye-bye.
Oh, yeah, and please be sure to put any questions that you might have for Commander Ferris in the comments or in the chat. Leave us any questions that you might have, you might be kind of curious about, because we can, develop our show around that.
Yeah, let me know what I forgot about Aquaman. Probably a lot.
Yeah. Well, I learned a lot tonight, so there was a lot I didn't know. So now you would think, being a DC guy, when there was a lot about Aquaman, I knew nothing until tonight. So, all right. Well, listen, hey, on that note, everybody, thanks a lot for tuning in, and we'll see you in about 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
All right. See you in about 2 weeks.